Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ISPP Policy Review. My name is Priyadarshini, your host for today, and the founder of the Women in Public Policy Club, with whom IPR is collaborating for this podcast. Our guest for today is Ms Angellica Aribam, a political activist working on issues of gender, race, and the democratization of politics. Ms Aribam was named one of Forbes India's 30 under 30 in 2017 for her work on policy and politics. In 2012, she became the first student from the marginalized northeastern region of India to be elected in the Delhi University Executive Committee. She was the National General Secretary of the Students' Wing of the Indian National Congress for about half a decade. She was also a fellow for women political leaders at Vital Voices, an American NGO by Hillary Clinton, where she was mentored by former prime ministers of Canada, New Zealand, and Peru, and trained by professors of Harvard Kennedy School. In 2019, she founded Femme First Foundation, a non-partisan, non-profit organization to amplify women's political leadership in India based on her lived experiences as a first-generation woman in politics. Her work has been featured widely by both national and international media. With a bachelor's degree in biochemistry from Delhi University and a master's degree in public policy from Peking University, Angellica is on a quest for learning. As a staunch advocate for gender and racial rights, she regularly writes for various publications, including the Indian Express, the Times of India, amongst others. In her free time, she loves to cook, read, and model. A very warm welcome to you, Angellica, and we're extremely delighted to have you here with us.
Thank you so much, Priyadarshini. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
So, at the outset, and also given the background of the recently concluded elections, especially amid a global pandemic, I would like to ask you, do you see the trend of re-election of incumbent governments in the states of Kerala, West Bengal, and Assam, basically almost all the states except Tamil Nadu, that has been the trend. So do you see this as an expression of the people's resistance to newness? And do you see this as a desire to stay comfortable with maybe a government that they feel has delivered a timely crisis response? And how do you see this trend? What sort of answers does it give us?
That I feel that the question is very reductive in nature. Anyone who understands or who follows political trends will tell you that different states have different political dynamics, right? The complexities of issues on which the voters vote are very different from state to state. When you talk about the pandemic and people's resistance to change, so to speak, right, during this pandemic, Tamil Nadu, like you mentioned, they have overthrown their previous government, and Tamil Nadu was doing remarkably good in comparison to states like, say, Assam or West Bengal in terms of their handling of the COVID pandemic. Kerala, Tamil Nadu, they were doing good, right, compared to the northern states. So I think your question here does not really apply. But what I will say is the fact that for us, let's take state by state, because that is how we should be looking at it very politically, right? So for example, a state like Kerala, which has never in its history repeated a government, has re-elected a government. And that is unprecedented in its nature. A lot of it goes to the COVID handling done by obviously Shailaja Teacher, who has now been dropped from the cabinet, unfortunately, right? But they received global acclamation for it. People recognized it. A lot of the voters voted for the work that they have done. On the other hand, it also falls on how the opposition party, which is the Congress party in Kerala, the Indian National Congress, not Kerala Congress. Kerala Congress is different than Indian National Congress in Kerala, right? So how they have mobilized themselves and how they have failed to garner the support of the people. I mean, it was sort of a given. People were operating from the point of view that Kerala never repeats its government, so it will be an easy ride for them. But that did not happen. So somewhere that complacency was a factor within the Congress party. Okay, that's Kerala. Let's move on to a state like Assam. Assam, the core issue of the election was not the pandemic, it was CAA and RC. And it was very much divided in the last 2 years because Assam was one of the states which saw the highest resistance, like people who were out on the streets protesting pre-pandemic against the NRC, right? They were protest, and it was a huge movement in the state. However, the pandemic happened and people were within their home confines and the government was dealing with it. The health minister, Hemanta Biswa Sharma, who is now the chief minister of Assam, was working hard to control it. But irrespective of that, the core issue still remained the NRC and CAA. The Congress party formed an alliance with another regional party known as AIUDF, which kind of cost them a lot. Because again, polarization of voters have been happening within the state for a long time. The whole Bangladeshi immigrant issue, so to speak, right, in political lexicon. So when the division was happening and when the Congress party aligned with itself with AIUDF, a Muslim-centric party, so to speak, there was a lot of sentiment, the public sentiment. There were a lot of Hindu voters who were not happy with that idea, right? So because of that alliance, the Congress kind of lost people's support other than the Muslim voters. That is what happened in Assam. We can now go to West Bengal. I talk a lot about Assam because I was in charge of Assam for 3 years when I was with the Congress party. So I have traveled to almost 80% of the state and understood and worked at the grassroots. So that is the reason I talk a lot about Assam. But moving on to West Bengal. West Bengal's, the BJP government has been after, trying so hard to change the government in West Bengal. They have been working hard. They launched this whole tirade against Mamata Banerjee and the Trinamool Congress. All of this in the run-up to the elections, we have seen how ugly it can get, right? So basically, again, there was a whole lot of mobilization and polarization that was happening again in West Bengal. What we need to understand is Mamata Banerjee has, of course, come back to power with, such a huge majority. But the BJP has also grown a lot within the state. If you see the number, they have 70 plus MLAs now. And earlier the number, if you look at it, it was 3. I think it was 3, yes. The Congress party, which was the primary opposition party back then in the last assembly election, is 0 now, 0 MLAs. The CPM, like you say West Bengal and you think of the Communist Party. That's how we grew up. Okay? Yeah, exactly. Jyoti Basu, that's how we are 90s kids. Just names are familiar with us. But now it has been reduced to 0. So polarization has happened in West Bengal. That is why the left and the Congress have been reduced to 0 and the BJP has gone up a lot. But again, elections it requires a lot of groundwork to be able to win an election. The BJP has, I give it to them, I would say they have done brilliantly in West Bengal. And they have come up from that an almost existent number to 70 plus. And of course, Mamata Banerjee has been able to retain her government. But if you see, like I said, overall, each state had their own issues to deal with. So the pandemic was not the defining character of the elections.
Right. So when I was looking at the election results also, I was wondering, the CPIM, its stand in Kerala is very different from its stand in West Bengal. And I'm also wondering what was the factor that actually projected the BJP to win in such huge numbers? What could that have been in West Bengal? So that is something that I've been thinking about.
Winning elections require a lot of groundwork. So election is not about just 1 year before we vote, right? Elections about the organizational structure, the fact that your workers, your karyakatras are on the ground building an organization. You need to have your booth level karyakarta, you need to have your mandal level karyakarta for them, you need to have district level and then the state level. It's a machinery. It's not a one-man show. It's not a one-woman show. It's a machinery you build over the years. And unfortunately, for many political parties, that machinery is dwindling away. They are sort of, they are working on social media. You see them working on social media, but when you go down on the when you go to the grounds, the block committees or booth level committees, you see no workers. They're non-existent there. Just if we don't work on that ground, how are you going to connect with your voters? So PR and this propaganda machinery, it doesn't really translate much into votes at the end of the day. And with the BJP, they have done in the last 2-3 years, what they have done is they have worked really hard on the ground. The karyakartas, because of the work that I currently do, I am in touch with all political parties, right? So I know how the BJP functions, how the Congress functions, and how much time they're devoting, because I am privy to, I have conversations with their karyakartas. So it's kind of fascinating the kind of amount of time they give on the ground, working and building an organization, which is why it has resulted to that number. Whereas for other political parties, even my former political party, so to speak, the Congress party, have not been putting that much of groundwork, have not been putting that much of labor into their organizational structure at the grassroots.
So, in your view, which political party do you think has taken advantage of social media the most? Because, today the online space has immensely grown, and some political parties, still have the whole grassroots karyakarta mobilization, and then some have taken to social media for that. So, and this also depends a lot on the voter demographic. I mean, it depends on whether voters are urban, educated, they have access to the internet. A lot of factors come into play when targeting vote banks, so to speak. So, which parties do you think have tailored their strategies in what sort of ways?
So let me tell you this: when the Twitter came to India, when politicians started using Twitter in India, this was 2012, 2013, 2011, 12, yeah. Shashi Tharoor was one of the first politician to be on Twitter. And people used to give him flack, you're a politician, you're supposed to be working. What are you doing online all the time, tweeting all the time, right? And that was the kind of opinions people had about social media. It kind of started growing on big. I was one of the first people to start using Twitter in my organization, and we were strongly advocating for the Congress party to come on Twitter, and this was 2012 because the Congress party was not on Twitter yet. We were asking back then our politicians, our ministers, because it was the Congress government then, our ministers to come online, to be on Twitter, because it's the best medium to convey a message. And our ministers back in the day would be like, we have so much work to do. We cannot be on social media, we have so much work to do. So yeah, it took them it took a lot of convincing for the party in itself and the ministers and other functionaries and leaders to come to social media. I mean, believe you me, it took a lot of convincing, right? Whereas on the other hand, the BJP they had started using social media, Twitter. Narendra Modi's team, back in the day, were 2012, 13, they were very active on social media. Right, while they were so active and targeting the government and setting the narrative, setting the agenda back in the day on social media, the Congress was not there defending itself. Over a period of time, the Congress is now full on social media. The BJP is full on social media. But the BJP has sort of moved away. In fact, not just I wouldn't use the term move away. I would say they have added on, yeah. From social media, they have gone to WhatsApp. So this whole WhatsApp university, WhatsApp factory, right? So they are sort of the first movers. They keep moving. They know when to take advantage of a situation, And the regional, like Facebook, regional messaging is in regional languages like Gujarati, or for example, like Bhojpuri, all this, or Bengali. They have done this targeting on Facebook as well, wherein they could push out their contents on in these languages where the regional people, the demography, will be able to understand. So I would say they are a pretty fast mover, and the Aam Aadmi Party has also done very well on social media. They have adapted very quickly since the day of the whole Anna movement. Facebook, I mean, young people were involved with Anna movement on Facebook back in the day, right? So yes, they have been also very, effective in using social media as a tool. And now most parties are on social media and they're using it as a medium. But again, it depends on how much of the first mover's advantage you can get out of it.
Right. So we know that women are a huge demographic, and the participation of women in the voting process automatically enhances democracy. And empirical research has time and again showed us that the exemplary performance of women leaders, especially at the grassroots and the panchayat level, in anything right from public service provisioning to actually centering the needs of the people in the process, empirical evidence points to that. And as a response to this, people are aware of this and they know this. So as a response, people sometimes tend to expect a lot from women leaders. And while this may have its place, do you somehow think that this reinforces stereotypes about women being more public serving than self serving? And at the same time, do you think this somehow leads us to inadvertently hold women to higher standards, or hold them to different standards than we hold men?
That's a good question and a layered question. So I'm gonna take it in parts. Okay. Number one, we talk about your first question. I think was about women being the stereotype about women being less self-serving. So now let's get into the leadership model of women, right? So a lot of studies have been conducted, and since 1991, 1992, when Harvard Business Review published an article about women's leadership model, being transformational in nature and instead of transactional in nature, because men have a transactional style of leadership and women have this transformational style of leadership. 1991, 1992, it has started creating this whole debate about women's leadership styles. Over a period of time, now in the last 30 years, research studies conducted at grassroots level. For example, in India, Rohini Pandey has done a lot of research, at the grassroots. It has shown that women leaders are very effective in, delivery services and welfare schemes delivery and all of this, education, infrastructure, etc., and etc. And across the world, when we look at all of this research that has been done, we see that women's leadership style is rooted on 4 pillars. That is the fact that women are collaborative in nature. They want to bring in experts. For example, even if we look at the COVID crisis, right? When we talk about women leaders during the COVID crisis, we talk about Jacinda Ardern, we talk about Angela Merkel, we talk about Chai Ing-wen, right? And we hail and we appreciate the fact that they have dealt with the COVID crisis very well. We appreciate their empathy and how collaborative they have been. They have been willing to listen to experts, they have been listening to the scientists and making them take the lead rather than, in contrast to male leaders like Donald Trump in the US back then, or Bolsonaro in Brazil, or even in India for that matter, Narendra Modi, right? In contrast to them, these women leaders were listening to experts and, taking opinions and advice of scientists on how to deal with the COVID crisis. They were even listening to the advice of the opposition leaders, unlike the other male leaders. So women leaders have this tendency of being collaborative in nature, number one. Number two, they have a very strong sense of mission. And this comes from the whole idea that women have been oppressed for a long time. We have been oppressed, right? When we have been oppressed for a long time, when we come to a position of power, we want to undo that oppression. We want to work hard to show that we deserve to be in that position of power. We have earned it. So they want to prove themselves over and over again. And they have this very strong sense of mission to undo the oppression. The third thing is they want to pay it forward. They want to help other women, get the same kind of recognition they have gotten. They want to, like, for example, when we say give back to the society, when we get somewhere in life, we kind of think about giving back to the society, right? So with women leaders, the term we use is paying it forward, where we have reached a position with the help of other people, because we cannot give back to those people. We groom someone else. We tend to bring other people up, pay it forward. So women leaders have this tendency, So now the whole idea here is women leaders exhibit this nature, empathetic nature. They have transformational, strong sense of mission. All of these factors lead to women leaders. Now coming to the point of is this stereotyping. Let's talk about that. So these are tendencies exhibited by a lot of women leaders in the world. But it's not necessary that all women leaders will have this traits. It's not necessary that, and history has proven that. We have had Margaret Thatcher, for example, Indira Gandhi, for example, which do not fit into this definition of women leadership as we know today. There are, of course, exceptions. But the fact of the matter is these are characteristics which have been seen mostly in women leaders, right? So that's about, it's basically research and evidence as you've spoken, and not so much about stereotype, but of course there are exceptions to this. Now coming to your second question of putting that burden onto them, the burden of expectancy. Recently I was speaking at University College of London, and one of the students, all of the speakers were sort of emphasizing the fact that women leaders have this superpower. We can do it well within our homes. We do well at our work. We can do it all. The speakers were emphasizing on that. And one of the, I raised this point to the students. One of the students asked, and I raised this point about how such stereotyping puts a disproportionate burden on women. I don't like doing household chores. Don't expect me to be good at household chores, but I'm good at my work, right? This whole idea of the superpower on women and the stereotypes, so to speak, of course, places that burden, that expectancy on women leaders to be great at everything that they do. And it's unfair. Of course, it's unfair. And we should ideally be telling women leaders that you are your own individual. You exhibit your own, persona. Do not try to fit into this kind of character or personality which has been defined, because most women tend to exhibit it. But it does not mean that you have to exhibit these qualities. You have to fit in. So that is the message that we should be conveying to people.
And in fact, I was reading about this just yesterday, and I've been thinking also about this for a long time. I feel like women leaders, like, let's say, for example, Mayavathi, we know that this is the age of money politics, right? And when you bring up Mayavathi, the first critique that anyone has is, oh, she was corrupt. Okay, but then my immediate mental reaction to that is, okay, so our male politicians are not corrupt, or, I'm not justifying it. It's just that, that is where the differential standards come in. Even I'm from Tamil Nadu, and we have seen Jayalalitha rule here for quite some time. And in fact, when she was imprisoned during the disproportionate assets case, which happened in 2016, so that was all anyone could talk about. But it's not as if the other male leaders here, like, it's not that, all their money is, completely earned from the most legitimate.
That's a very good point, Priyadarshini, and I'm glad we're talking about it. This comes from one thing in the mindset, and as someone, I'll say this from my own personal experience. I come from a marginalized community, and there is this sort of expectation put on me to represent my entire community. So if I do something good, it's great, people will applaud it. But if I do one mistake, then my whole community will be painted in that color. It will be the failure of my whole community. It will be saying, oh, northeastern people are not good. They are not a good, for example, they are not a good writer because I don't write well, or they're not a good politician because I'm not a good politician. The whole community tends to be painted in that same color. That's a thing that happens with women leaders as well. So when there's this burden put on them wherein they have to constantly do good, constantly do well, the moment they slip, the entire women as a whole will be painted in a bad light. Like Mayavathi is corrupt, women politicians are corrupt, and yeah, Mamta Banerjee does not know how to speak proper English, for example. All of these things, I mean, women, we have this burden as women politicians, we have to represent the whole community, which is rather unfortunate, which it's really
Also, this
saddening when.
whole idea of calling our women leaders, Didi or Amma, I mean, we don't call our male politicians, brother or Baku or anything. I mean, I feel like that's a persona that a lot of women have to create to kind of desexualize themselves by
Yeah.
adopting these, figures of address so that they become more acceptable to voters in general and male voters in particular. And unfortunately, it's still the male voters who wield influence on how their families vote. This is also something that happens. And um, the vote of the man is sometimes the vote of the family. And when that is the case, then they have to sort of cultivate these personas to be acceptable in the public sphere. And especially for Jayalalitha, I keep coming back to her because I've grown up here for quite some time and I've seen the kind of politics that plays out. She was in the film industry, and immediately that becomes a very easy target for the opposition party to attack or assassinate her character, which is maybe why she had to develop that persona of Amma.
Yeah, women politicians, we need to de-glam ourselves a lot. We need to, for the longest period of time, I didn't wear lipstick, red lipstick, because it does not fit into the image of a woman politician, right? You have to be wearing like karak, cotton saris, because that is how the image is of women politicians. For the longest period of time, I was told not to wear t-shirts or not to wear skirts, because that's not how women politicians dress up, right? And the whole relational issue, the whole idea here is, as public representatives, as you are answerable to the public at any point in time. You can get a call at 12 in the night, you can get a call at 1 in the morning saying someone somewhere is in trouble within your constituency. And as a woman leader, as a leader, you have to be there. You have to be there for the people because you are their representatives, right? And one reason people refrain from voting for women leaders is because they think that women leaders will not be approachable after a point in time. After, say, 8 o'clock in the night, Vasundhara Raje was criticized a lot because after 8 o'clock, she did not take people's calls, because she also needed to have her own personal life, and people used to criticize her as 8 p.m. chief minister, right? So a lot of this voter sentiments comes about reaching out to their representatives and women MLAs. They feel if it's in a women MLA, then we cannot reach out to them in the middle of the night when we need their help. So it's better to vote for the men. Because of sentiments like this, women tend to establish relationships. Amma, Behenji. That way, people will feel that they are always approachable. Once you you establish a familiar relationship, you tend to become approachable. People will not see you as an outsider. People will Behenji is always available. Amma is always available. So that is the whole idea here. It all boils down to the patriarchy that we have within our societies, of our perceptions that, we feel that it's not, voting for a woman is not right. So these things do tend to develop, because I've had experiences with myself. For example, I have rushed to the police station at 2 in the morning, at 11:30 in the night, I would call that one of northeastern kids is arrested and I would have to rush. So it happened, and it becomes easier for those people approaching me if I have a familiar relationship with them. Otherwise, they cannot just, reach out to me. They don't feel that comfortable. So I think a lot of it comes down from that.
So we've talked a little bit about national politics as well as state politics. Now let's come to student politics. So, what are some of the, in your experience and also in general, what do you think are some of the challenges to contesting as well as winning the elections? Because once a woman wins elections, we only see the person right in front of us, the path that she has forged to get there, and all the milestones as well as the invisible glass ceiling that exists even at the level of student politics. What are these visible and invisible barriers that maybe others might not know about? What does that look like in terms of microaggressions or anything along the path to becoming a student leader?
Priyadarshini, I think that if I answered your question, like in detail, we don't have enough time for it. It's gonna take like a day or two.
I just got carried with the conversation. Yeah.
So let's try and touch upon the some central things here, right? Oh well, let's begin with number one. The whole notion that politics is dirty. Women do not, women's, even if they really want to get into politics, more often than not, their families keep telling them it's not for you. It's very dirty. It's not meant for women, like only there are gundas in politics. That sort of a narrative is there. That's number one. Number two, in my time in student politics, when we talk about student politics, in my time that I was in charge of the students' union for, I was in charge of states across the country, and I would travel to a lot of campuses and university, colleges and universities, and interact with a lot of young children, young women and young girls. And you would be surprised by the amount of interest these young women have in politics. You would be surprised the number of women who join politics, in their first years of college, in their second year of college. Like huge number enter the political system. They work really hard, passionately for a couple of years. And then they drop out of the system. Now let's see why they are dropping out of the system, right? So politics is not a career that pays you. It's not like you enter the political system and you know in how many years you're going to get the next step. It's not like a corporate job that you have an entry-level job, you have a mid-managerial role, then a senior manager, and then VP, CEO, etc. and etc. It's defined. There is no such demarcation here in politics. You don't know whether it'll take 5 years for you to get an assembly ticket. You don't know whether it'll take you 50 years to get an assembly ticket. So, and it's not a career that pays you. So since time immemorial, women have used financial independence to fight against and to push back against the family pressure, right? If you're not earning your own money, your families can ask you to do what they want you to do, and you don't really have a standing because you are dependent on them. So since politics does not pay, a lot of these women who enter passionately and work so hard, once they complete their college, after 2-3 years, within the first year, they drop out of the political system because there is family pressure on them to either get married or to look for a job that pays so that they can do what they want. Coming to my own example, I was 25. I won my first election at the age of 20, then I became national. I got into national politics within a few months. Then for 5 years, I did this. By the time I was 25, I was working so hard on the ground. I was preparing for an assembly seat, Manipur Assembly. I was preparing for my MLA candidature. I had worked so hard on the ground in my constituency, like going house to house, booth committees, block committees, etc. and etc. But I was denied an assembly ticket by my political party, which now my former, because I'm not longer there. But yeah, so when the Congress party denied me an assembly ticket because of two things. Number one, because I was a young woman, just 25. Right? They did not like two things about me. Number one was my gender. Number two was my age. I was too young, according to them. Even though the Indian Constitution gave me the right to contest an election at the age of 25, the party didn't want me to. So when that happened, my parents came down on me very hard and they were like, we have supported your dream. We have followed your ambition. You have done this for 5 years. You're 25 now, and it's I don't come from a well-to-do family. I mean, we have always been hand to mouth. So my father and my mom were like, we can't keep supporting you anymore. We have given enough time. Now it's time for you to start earning an income, and pay your own bills, and for you to support us. It's time for you. My father had already retired. So he was like, it's time for you to support us. Or if you cannot do that, then get married. Find a husband who can support your ambitions. And that is when I left the political system, right? So a lot of women go through similar challenges because of lack of financial independence, because of lack of an income, they have to drop out of the system. So the retention rate of women in politics is very low. Then there is, of course, sexism within the system, like I mentioned earlier, character assassination. You cannot wear this, you cannot do this, you cannot be hanging out with these people. God forbid a woman is seen drinking a glass of wine. Oh my God, all hells are going to break loose. Like, how can a woman consume alcohol, right? How can a woman consume cigarettes? All of those things that are there, sexism within the system. And then there are predators within the system, who will try to take advantage of young women who are entering the system, sexually assault them. And it happens a lot in a lot of political parties. And those are the barriers that exist. And then there is the lack of political will within political parties. They don't want to, they don't want to give away power to women. So they will always have a symbolic or token one or two women, and that's about it. Because again, political system is male dominated and no one wants to share power. They want to keep the power from themselves. So it's limited to that. So women are put against women, they're made to fight amongst themselves. So it happens a lot. Then there are infrastructural problems, like for example, when you go on an election campaign, and you would expect, if you're going for election campaigns or road shows, it's a whole day long program, constituency to constituency, you have to travel. And there will be no toilets for women. The most basic thing of all toilets, people will not even think, because men can just go and relieve themselves wherever, right? For women, it's difficult, so we will not be drinking water. It's a lot of challenge that way as well in terms of infrastructure. So those are some main points, but there is a lot more.
Do you think there's also a lack of political mentorship when you don't see women who can actually guide you through these things? Because maybe you are one of the first few to make a mark in this particular field. Who do you look up to? Who understands your needs and who understands your particular challenges?
When I joined politics, I was 20 years old. And I come from a non-political family, first generation, and I would look at all these women leaders, and within my own political party back then, we had a lot of women ministers. I would look at them and I would wonder, oh my God, if I wish I had one of them as my mentor, how much it will be nice, how great it will be just to have someone tell me that, Beta, I have your back. Better, keep doing what you're doing. I mean, those words of motivation, it really helps, or the fact that, and also there's a lot of sexual violence within the system and all. So just to know and share your, share your angst or your problems with someone who is a woman, it would be really helpful. Unfortunately, that's not something that happens in Indian politics. My mentoring has not been available. It's been very difficult, and which is why I led to finding the organization that I currently run right now. So we provide we have mentorship here in one of the programs, which is the Fellowship for Women in Politics. These young women who are entering the political system, we give them a mentoring opportunity with a seasoned women politician. So, they get one-on-one mentoring monthly. So because of the lacuna that I saw exist within the political system in terms of mentoring, in terms of other capacity building opportunities, which is why I founded the organization that I currently run. But on its own, there is no such initiative from political parties within themselves.
So since you mentioned tokenism, let's talk about what meaningful representation for women in politics actually looks like. So when you say meaningful representation, it's more than just having women fill certain positions and execute certain responsibilities. Women have to have the ability to take independent decisions free from influence. And this is actually closely linked to women's ability to holding cabinet positions. So this year, in the previous elections of 2019, there were 78 women who were elected to parliament, and that is about 14% of our parliament. And we still don't have reservation. The bill has still not been passed. And this is the picture right now. But why do we have so few women in cabinet positions? Because even the recent state elections that happened in Tamil Nadu, only two women made it to, were given cabinet portfolios. And that also, one of them was from a reserved constituency. It's pretty much the same in Kerala with Ms Shailaja being dropped. And even in the current center, we have only three women, out of which one of them resigned, of course, after the passage of the farm bills. So why do we have so few women in cabinet? And how do we sort of advocate to ensure that more women are given cabinet portfolios? And not just that, but they are actually occupying more space, and they are not given cabinet portfolios that are restricted to women and child or tribal development. These are very important portfolios. But the thing is, women also have the potential to work in other portfolios that are involved in governance.
You have touched upon the fact that India currently has 14.3% of women in our parliament, which is the highest ever if we look at India, but still very much below the global average of 25.1%. We have the Women's Reservation Bill has been pending for the last 26 years now. It's in fact, it has lapsed in 2014 after it was passed in the Rajya Sabha in 2010. So there is no Women's Reservation Bill anymore, it has lapsed. So currently, when we look at the women's number of women, the marginal representation of women, 14% in our parliament, 14.3%, right? We need to understand that just the number that we see in the cabinet, it's less because the number of women in the parliament is less. That is why what we need to do is we need to have more women representation. We need to have the Women's Reservation Bill. When we have 32% women in the parliament, which is the critical mass, when we have that critical mass of representation, then it's going to lead to changes. How it's going to lead to changes? Number one, it's going to lead to more cabinet positions for women because there is more representation. It's going to lead to this characteristics of token women, the queen bee phenomenon. It's called the queen bee phenomenon, wherein token women are, they are, even despite their capabilities, they have been told or asked to act as mere puppets, So this whole phenomenon wherein they feel that they have to act like male cabinet members or male leaders, where they want to act like them so that they are not seen under the lens of women. This phenomenon will also go away if there is a critical mass, because there will be a sizable number of women. Then they will look at these women, and they feel that, okay, we don't have to emulate men anymore. Also, we need to understand a lot of this 1 to 2 women representation, creates a lot of infighting between women. It's called patriarchal bargaining. The phenomenon is called patriarchal bargaining, wherein you show women 1-2 seats, 1-2 parliamentary positions, 1-2 cabinet seats, right? 2 in Tamil Nadu, 1 cabinet minister in Assam. You have this 1-2 token seats reserved, set out for women. Then there is a lot of infighting that happens between the women because they want to be that 1 or 2 women. So a lot of infighting and trying to pull each other down happens, because they want to be there in that position. This is patriarchal bargaining, wherein men show the women just a piece of the pie instead of the whole pie, and say that this is 33% for you, this is 1 seat for you, 2 cabinet ministries for you, fight amongst yourself for this. And they will keep the rest for themselves. So what we should be telling women, and more women leaders and more women should be aware of this fact, that we should not fall into that trap of patriarchy. We should not fall, and we should not look at only those token 1-2 seats, or only that 33%, or only that piece of the pie that patriarchy shows us. We can have the whole pie for ourselves, I mean, bring more women, try and capture the whole pie for ourselves. Maybe leave 1 or 2 for the men, diversity is good, but ultimately try and capture the whole space. When the Ruth Bader Ginsburg was asked many years ago on how many women will be sufficient in the Supreme Court in the United States, right? She said when there are 9 out of 9 women. So that is when, that kind of a psyche is where we need our women leaders to have, that we're not going to fall for the trap. We're going to have the whole pie. And then your question about women being relegated to women and child ministry, for example. But I think that is changing. I mean, look at Nirmala Sitharaman, finance minister, defense minister earlier, with even Assam has given a finance ministry to women. That stereotype is slowly changing. Indira Gandhi, in fact, had the defense ministry portfolio many, many years ago in the 1980s. So that stereotype is slowly changing. However, still, we need to get rid of that whole tokenism part. We need to, because we have to ensure that these women are there and doing good work, exercising their agency, and they are not acting as per what their political masters are telling them to. And that is what we need to do. So I think that answers your question.
Yeah. So a little off topic, but a couple of months ago, there was this incident which happened. I think it was France, if I'm not wrong, where I think about 60% or 58% of women occupied administrative positions. And this was actually challenged, saying that this is not gender equal.
They had to pay a fine.
They had to pay a fine. And I was like, this is so ridiculous. I mean, then that just conveys a very mechanical understanding of gender equality is not just women and men 50-50. It's also about representation and power dynamics. And I think everyone just missed that point.
I think when the mayor they had to give the fine, and when the mayor, the city, she was a lady, and when she went to give that check, she was doing it very proudly that, we have women.
She did. She said, I'm very proud. She said that.
Very proudly. So I think that conveys the whole message, that on paper, you might see a lot of things, but when we actually see it in practice, people are still not comfortable having, a lot of women leaders. People are still not comfortable. And we have a lot of unlearning to do as a society. We have a lot of conditioning that we have to unlearn. And hopefully with the new generation, with social media, with people like you and me having this conversation and reaching out to more people, things will change.
Hopefully. So you mentioned how inducting more women in cabinet positions can only be a logical step from having more women in parliament. And the reservation bill is one of the ways to ensure this. But a lot of progressive voices have said that reservation of seats in parliament is not enough. And in fact, at the political party level, there has to be a certain proportion of seats reserved for women. In Tamil Nadu, in fact, Seeman of the Nam Tamilar Katchi, this year he gave 50% of the seats to women. Of course, it's a secondary matter that unfortunately the party did not win any seats. But this is something that a lot of people have touted as one of the ways to increase representation. And there are some countries like Argentina which have had this for a very long time. Do you think this is one of the ways to ensure better representation? And if it is, then how do we advocate for this?
Okay. The issue, I am not a proponent of the idea of having voluntary quotas. And the reason I say this is because voluntary quotas don't work. If you look at, you mentioned Argentina, but if you look at the numbers in Latin America, you look at the numbers in Europe, you look at the numbers in Africa. When political parties give voluntary quotas, it does not translate to more. All of these countries have less than 20% women representation in their parliaments. However, if you have a reservation in terms of a parliamentary legislation, right, it leads for sure 33% because it is mandated by the law. It leads to, for at any point in time in the parliament, there are going to be 33%. When you give it to when you tell political parties to do it, more it's about their whims and their fancies. It's not a law. So they can decide on which seats they want to give women this nomination, because women, more often than not, will be given unwinnable seats. Right? They will be given seats because they just have to fulfill an obligation, right? It's not mandated by law. So they will give seats which are already where the party is already very, very weak to women, just for the optics of it. I find the whole concept of voluntary quota as an optics. I've also written articles on this a lot. And the other thing here that we need to understand is we talk about how the BJD has given and TMC had given tickets, 32% and 40% tickets to women in the Lok Sabha, in the 2019 Lok Sabha. And we saw that TMC giving only 17% tickets to women in this assembly. So when we leave it at the whims and fancies of a political leader, then we don't know, they might give more ticket today, they might not give tomorrow, like the TMC has done, right? 32, 40 to 17 now. And also, what happens when these leaders who are so-called proponents of giving more quota to women, what if something happens to them and they're not in a position of leadership anymore tomorrow? What if the next person who takes over decides not give ticket to women at all? Right? So we need a law for sure. That's the only way to achieve this. And another thing is, I have seen how these voluntary quotas do not work, because when I was in charge of, when I was with the students wing of the Congress Party, we had this internal quota for women. So there is this elections we used to do, at every level, at the district level, at the state level, and there used to be reserved seats for women, young women. So it was extremely difficult for us, to fill the seats, because women did not come forward and contest it, right? And it was not because the party also did not feel the obligation to, because it's not going to translate into a Lok Sabha seat or an assembly seat where people are going to fight for it, right? So the party does not have that much of a political will. It just remains a sort of a token key. This is something that we do. And there is no, what do you call it? No hard work put into it, no effort put into it to bring out more women leaders. So it just remains something superficial. It doesn't really translate into tangible number of women coming forward or contesting elections. So the whole idea here is, number one, we need reservation as a law, so that one law can change the face of representation entirely. Number two, we need capacity building of women in political parties. That is what we need. We need capacity building, we need training, we need mentorship, and we don't need something that will be at their hands like voluntary quota. That is not the solution.
Right. So one last quick question about the reservation quota. So there is a fear among a lot of opposition parties, and also many political parties, in fact, which express concerns of how the 33% proportion will inevitably be taken up by women who come from influential families and who come from families that are already in the political space, or women who are just more privileged, like upper caste women who have access to resources. So how do you see a quota within quota system going forward for women who belong to?
I am an intersectional feminist who believes in representation. I am all for quota within quota. I feel that is absolutely needed. And going forward in the women's reservation bill that comes forward, right, the change needs to be made. Quota within quota, we need representation from women of all religion, caste, SC, ST. There should be a quota within quota. Otherwise, it just becomes something that will again remain in the hands of the Savarna feminists, so to speak.
So on this note, Angellica, what is the one message that you would want to give to women who are aspiring to join politics, be it at any level?
The one thing I like to say is it might look difficult. It might feel that you might not be ready for it. It might feel that this is not meant for you. But once you enter it, once you take that plunge, when you see change, that your one action changing somebody's life forever, you would realize that it's all totally worth it. All the challenges, all the hardships that you go through. And it is the best way to be able to bring change in the society. So take that plunge.
So thank you. And on this note, we will end the podcast. Thank you so much for taking out your time to speak to me, to speak to all of us at ISPP. And I'm sure our batch will love watching it. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
And thank you so much for having me on the show.